be strong.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dr. AJ Macon podcast. Today with me, I have Dr. AJ Macon, and we will be talking about quite a couple of things, but the main topic of today is going to be mental health awareness. Doctor, welcome.
Hi, Reggie. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Doctor, why do we need to be aware of our mental health in this day and age?
Well, Reggie, over the years, decades, or even maybe we can say during this past century, there's been enormous progress made in acknowledging and accepting mental health to the point where we're at. However, still, according to the World Health Organization, close to 1 billion people are currently living with some mental disorder of note. 3 million people die annually from harmful alcohol use, and one person loses their life every 40 seconds from suicide. Obviously, then, much more action needs to be taken regarding mental illness. And as you know, with this COVID-19 pandemic at the moment, 2020 and 2021 has been especially significant with regards to mental health. It's brought to the surface stuff that we didn't necessarily maybe aware of. People how more so are struggling under this excessive strain, are living in isolation, away from social contact, struggling in conditions in terms of work, economic conditions. So all these things have made it even more worse. Especially here in South Africa, we are very much affected. We have the most significant statistics in terms of COVID-19 on the African continent. Beyond the physical, there's been tremendous mental and emotional fallout. It's been absolutely tremendous. Beyond just having economic consequences, this COVID-19 pandemic, obviously it's had the psychological consequences, the social consequences, how we work, how we study, how we live has been completely transformed. Yet, the demands of our work hasn't changed. You know, we still chase career, success, wealth. We don't tolerate mediocrity. We still have these key performance indicators. We have to be the first at the expense of family, relationships, our social circle. In fact, if anything, the technology which allows us to work at home has made us work even faster at a greater pace. The rat race has picked up. And we're doing this. It has come at some sacrifice. What sacrifice? It's come at a social and emotional sacrifice. Family has become secondary to the workplace. As much as you may be in their presence, we're not connecting with them. We just communicate with them. We provide what's needed, and beyond that, we just move on. And it's just become more and more stressful. And the way we view our life has completely changed. So that, in many ways, or in some ways, is describing what mental health is about in this day and age.
Interesting you mentioned, and because it seems as though that the corporate world is taking over people's lives. And what in this 21st century, what corporate scenario do you see in this regard?
So I work a bit with the corporates and see patients who are in this corporate world. And every single one of them talk about the excessive work demands. I mean, just this week, I had a person who told me, you know, he's not delivering up to standard at work. And maybe I'm still old school. And he still describes they're working till 6 o'clock on Monday morning. And I had to clarify that from what time to what time. He says, no, I started on Sunday evening and I stopped at Monday, 6 o'clock, and he still didn't feel he was meeting up to his work demands. He went to bed, he was dreaming of work. He got up, he went back to work, and this is around 8, 9 o'clock, because he's a manager, he has to make sure the rest of the team are delivering. And it's not just the high hours, it's the quality of work that he was basically complaining of. So it's the long work hours, the weekends that they put in. In fact, there was a study done in 2015 of 600,000 participants, right? Where they compared working 40 hours a week to working, say, 55 hours a week. And those who worked over 55 hours a week, there was a 33% higher risk of stroke, 13% increase in heart disease. There's something I'll share with you. You know, as much as we work hard in South Africa and the rest of the Western world, in Japan, there's a concept called karoshi. Now, the work culture is so intense that in the 1970s, they invented this word called karoshi, which literally means death by overwork.
My goodness.
Yeah. And it basically involves employees committing suicide or suffering from heart failure or some stroke because of the long work hours. And there's tons of studies to demonstrate how serious and significant it is. And if anything, other countries have not stepped back from the model of long work hours. It's become more the norm. For people to tell me, especially now that we Zoom calling, that they have calls set aside from 8 till 5 in the evening and they still go on working till 10 at night. And every single time I get asked this question, work-life balance thrown at you. And I ask them, is there such a thing? And the reason I ask that question is that what is the company's bottom line? And eventually the answer will come out, financial bottom line is the most important thing. And given that there may be a financial target to be met, and perchance in this day and age it's tougher, you meet that target by October, November of the financial year, given that it might end by December, does the company close down? Everyone says no. In fact, if anything, they're working harder during that Christmas period. And two other questions, as much as we say, does your company pay you enough? I've never gotten an answer for all these years that anyone feels that they're getting paid enough. And does the company feel that financially they're performing at the ultimate? Very rarely do I hear that as well. So given that the financial bottom line is infinite in nature, it seems, how can we demand work-life balance in that environment? So it actually seems to be paradoxical, this concept of work-life balance. But it's something to explore further. And this is something we all are struggling with, because one of the things now we discuss in terms of success is now, many people see it as time to do what they want. Very different when 20 odd years ago, where success was working hard and making some money. Now it's making enough money to do what we want, to have the time to do what we want. And at the end of the day, no matter how hard you work, we all just have 24 hours in a day. And no matter what, there's a limit to the time we have. So this has led to, in this century, family challenges, work conflict, lack of control in the workplace. We don't have the social support. You are told to cope. You have to cope. If you're not good enough, get out of here. When I was just did an MBA, I remember attending a job interview that there were companies that would come across to the business school hiring people. And maybe as a psychiatrist, well, I later became a psychiatrist. As a young doctor, I went to these interviews. They, for whatever reason, agreed to interview me, given I had a medical degree and an MBA. And I'll never forget what the interviewer said. In my company, it's either up or out. And I was like, Jesus. And they were quite comfortable to say that statement. And it's fascinating what work pressure, what mental and psychological pressure we are putting on someone. Because it's either up or out. And even if you think of it, the most successful people have their down days. Yet there's corporates saying, you never have a down day. You're either going up or you get out. And that's fascinating. This is the demand that we put on people.
I must say that, that must be putting quite a lot of pressure on people. And obviously because people want to get something for their families or survive, for that matter, due to the security that's being provided by the corporate world. But then what are the consequences of this form of lifestyle or this kind of pressure that is being exerted on people?
So everyone will complain of the stress associated with it. But the stress is not acute, as in it doesn't come and go. It's chronically there. It's 24/7. It's all day, all night. It's all weekend. Waiting for the deliverable on the Monday. People are telling me, a friend called me yesterday and saying, it's the long weekend, yet I will be working through the weekend. He gets tremors and palpitations because of the fact that he had a deliverable on a project, and thank God it came through. However, this causes severe physical and mental, emotional exhaustion. If you look at burnout, which has been recognized by the World Health Organization lately as an illness as such, there's 3 main criteria, and that will be the emotional exhaustion. They discuss detachment, cynicism, even irritability, and where you feel professionally deficient. And together with that, I've had patients describing feeling completely overwhelmed, overburdened. All right? And all this has shown, it's all very well to say, oh, yes, I've got these symptoms. But these symptoms have been shown, generally, stress in itself, it's been shown to shorten our lifespans. It increases the risk of age-related illnesses, heart disease, stroke, all these things, and even lifestyle illnesses, the diabetes, the high cholesterol that we see in this day and age. And what we're doing, if I can use an analogy, is like, over the years, when we're young, we have lots of energy. And we're driving our car, we've got our foot on the accelerator, we're going at 120 k's an hour, 55 miles an hour, whatever the national speed limit is. But what's happening slowly to this engine as we're revving it is that we're resting our leg on the clutch. And as much as we're revving our engine, it doesn't get the speed we want. And it's inevitable that we slow down. But we're not slowing down in terms of the work we do. Our bodies are physically, mentally, emotionally slowing us down. We can't keep up the levels. Fascinatingly, I mean, yesterday I had a 14-year-old complaining of burnout because of her academic requirements. She put the pressure on herself. She's doing 9 subjects. She's 3 years away from graduating from high school. Her concern is she will not keep the pace up.
My goodness.
And I said to her, wow, it's amazing that a 14-year-old is putting so much of pressure on herself. But if anything, I have to tell you, great, you want to keep the grades up. But at what expense? And will you be able to sustain this level of pressure on yourself? And if anything, I had to just tell her, slow down. Yeah. And this is the challenges we have. If 14-year-olds are going through this, imagine what adults are going through.
And I must say, maybe it seems that obviously the corporate world, whatever that is exerting on the parents, now is trickling or is showing itself from the developmental kind of grades. I mean, primary, what do you have to worry about? It seems it's a new kind of way of doing things. And I wonder what is the current mental health status of the people, or rather the people in general in South Africa or the world in general.
So, you know what's fascinating? We tend to accept negative mental states as being the norm. So it's normal. It's a good question you've asked, because it's normal to meet people and they tell you, I'm fearful, I'm worried, I'm distracted, I'm confused, I'm frustrated, I'm irritated, I'm exasperated. You know, I naturally have patients telling me, I am angry. And we see that as a natural state, but the harm we're doing to our bodies is at a subtle level, or overt level, we are constantly in this fight, flight, fright mode. It's normal to suggest that we are guilty, feeling hopeless, overwhelmed, overburdened. And this has become our normal status quo, to say I'm indecisive or unsure. I'm always anxious, you know? And what's happened is, if I use a statement, it's like we've become comfortable and secure with the anger, irritation, and frustration we're going through. We're comfortable and secure with our pain and hardship. So why should I break free of my comfort and security, of my anger, frustration, irritation? And that becomes our body's natural, normal state of being. And what we're doing, we're always in a reactive mode. And what are we reacting to? It's not a lion out there or some natural stressor.
No.
It's life itself. And if life itself is overwhelming, we are constantly reacting. And what we're doing is our immune state is constantly reacting to an environment. And it's inevitable that we develop some illness as a result, given our adrenaline levels are through the roof, our cortisol levels are high due to the stress we're going through. And we accept this as the norm. And if you look at it, we then go through these bouts of depression and anxiety, and we then qualify, if I say so, for mental illness, because it needs that straw that breaks the camel's back. It becomes inevitable that the ultimate stressful situation in your life, it may not be even the worst stressor, just throws us off. And that makes us even more depressed, more anxious, to the point where we need medication to cope. And it's natural maybe to avoid stress and uncomfortable and painful situations, but if we see it as the norm, we become immune to it. So it's, if I use a literally an experiment, and it's a well-known one, where they put these frogs in water, normal room temperature water, and they heated the water by a degree at a time. And the water state reached a level, the temperature of the water, where it was uncomfortable for the frog to be in the water. What do you think the frog did? Did it jump out? Or what would it do?
Well, I mean, the instinct will be to jump out, obviously.
Yeah. But what they found was that frogs stayed in the water. We human beings are none the different. We stay in a highly stressful situation. We accept it as a norm. Our peers, our society says, you got to learn to cope. You're not good enough. And we stick in there even though you actually don't want to be there. Interestingly, they put the frogs in uncomfortable water as a first line, and they found they jumped straight out. So we start accepting the status quo, and we don't remove these adverse, demanding circumstances that we live in. We see it as normal. We kind of accept it. The hassle is, though, we find not good coping mechanisms, substance abuse, self-destructive behavior. And when it becomes all too much, it might even mean where we take our lives. Yet I must add that optimum mental health is essential for us as humans. And it's possible.
I just find it very interesting because it seems that we have made this kind of pressure a new norm, a new kind of way of living, and we thoroughly deteriorating. We're losing ourselves, we're losing our minds, and it has been made to be okay. When with that being the case, what is the current state? What does the current stats or statistic look like?
So in 2017, there was this Gallup Negative Experience Index, right? And that's like a snapshot of the world's emotional state. And they looked at about 154,000 people in about 145 or so countries. And they recorded the highest ever levels of stress, sadness, anger, worry, physical pain. And there's been tons of studies. I mean, there was another study done by Yale University together with the University of California. And they said things like average person is in a developed society is likely to experience between 4 to 5 episodes of stress per week. And I've had patients who tell me, that's nothing compared to what they're going through. They just feel that they're experiencing it all the time. The studies show 1 in 4 people are likely to experience mental health in a year. Mental health problems at the moment, we're looking at about 700 million people worldwide. And we obviously, in terms of disability, temporary or physical disability, which we obviously have the stats for more so, mental and substance use disorders is one of the leading causes. We all try to change our lives, in spite of this, but we really struggle. I mean, In the States, for example, 49% of Americans, workers, report feeling stress. Interestingly, a country like China, all right, lots more people are struggling. And they're saying now, now slowly the results are coming through that they did a study between 2014 and 2016. Mental health issues had soared over 25%. And you're looking at about, I think, 170 odd million people that reported feeling some level of mental health issues that they were reporting. But as much as we have those stats, those that get the professional help, who have access to it, or even aware of physical professional help being available, they report only about 20 million or so receiving that. So there's all these kind of factors that are causing challenges, and the fact that many people are unaware and don't have access to mental health treatment.
And obviously, as you're saying, these are the states, and it seems there's a lot that is happening statistically and in people's life. How does stress, therefore, affect our bodies, with that being the case?
So let's break it up, because different parts of our bodies react differently, and some of us are more predisposed. It's not like if you stress that you will get specific illness. We sometimes can be resilient in one area of our body, but predisposed in another part of our body. Some of us may be good at running or swimming or whatever it is, depending on which parts of our body is just naturally predisposed that way. So, for example, if you look at the brain, we have difficulty concentrating. We may have anxiety, depression, all the things we mentioned. But beyond that, stress affects the other aspects as well. Very important in this day and age is cardiovascular, which is one of the leading causes of illness. They complain of high blood pressure, high cholesterol levels, and as a result then being more predisposed to strokes or heart attacks. Even our skin, we are more likely to have dry skin, acne, delayed tissue repair. Our nails and stuff at extremes of stress can become brittle. Our hair takes a knock as well, leading to patients commonly describe hair loss. Muscles, we sit all day, we tense all the time. It leads to inflammation, aches, pains, tightness. Our immune system, very importantly, we have decreased immune function. We're less able to react to illness. As much as we react, it takes longer to recover from illness. Our immune systems being on high alert all the time is not working at the effective levels as might have used to. Our reproductive system, decreased libido, decreased hormone production. Very common symptoms patients will present with is problems with their gut, diarrhea, constipation, indigestion, bloating, just abdominal pain, gastric reflux. These are some of the things people will complain of. So, and those are, in a nutshell, some of the things, but you can see how they affect various parts of our body.
And obviously, I understand that, one's microbiome is actually getting a hit from this, and I guess it explains why quite a lot of people, there's, according to the stats of the World Health Organization, there is an increase in obesity, there's increase in...
Absolutely,
yeah. And it seems all these different illnesses are coming as a result of, as you mentioned previously, the stresses that are exerted on us by all these corporate pressures and these new, these new demands of technology and the lifestyle created there. Therefore, and I wonder, for anyone who's listening out there, they were asking themselves this question: how can they deal with this stress?
Yeah. And before we even get there, I'll tell you how we generally deal with it, because I think that's probably something we probably will all resonate with or identify with, right?
Mm.
So how do we generally deal with stress? Nowadays, we carry this metal object with us everywhere we go, right?
Mm.
So we check our phones.
My goodness.
You know, we revert to social media.
Mm.
We check what the latest messages are. You know, we need that distraction. It's like gives us a quick buzz, a fix mentally. You know, like wow, what's the latest cricket scores, or who's trending on Instagram or Twitter? You know, what's the latest video got set. The other thing we might do is we just spend endless hours on TV. You know, social media entrapment. You know, we call it binging, where we sit for hours on end, numbing our brain, being trapped by just the end of a particular episode, and we'll go on to the next episode. You know, these are the ways we just literally numb our brains to the world. And what more and more I see, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, is withdrawing from friends and family. Right? We socially isolate ourselves. You know, this week I had a patient says, I've cut ties with the world. I need to go and phone my friends and establish with them or tell them why I've not made contact with them for over a year. You know? And people, and he slowly started doing that, and he describes where people were concerned enough to think, geez, what had happened to him? Where was he? As much as we socially isolate, maybe pre-pandemic or maybe now we're still trying to do that, some of us jump into this frenzied social life. We get into this party mode. We completely overindulge. We overeat, but then also sometimes we undereat. You know, we extremes. We live lives of extremes. We sleep too much or we sleep too little. And the one that's possibly another area of mental illness as well is indulging in substances, be it alcohol, smoking, or drugs, to numb the brain. You know, I'll ask patients, given I work at a rehab center, what are the fundamental reasons you use substances? And there's two answers that generally come out. In the early days, it was to increase the pleasure, to have some fun, to stimulate the brain, to take you places you'd never been before, to experience the ecstasy, the joy. And then I'll ask them, now that you're in the clinic, in the rehab section, are you experiencing those levels of joy that you did? And they'll tell you, you're lucky if it's even momentary. So why are you still using the substances? It's to numb the pain, the emotional pain, the heartache, the suffering that they're going through.
Goodness.
And people nowadays, as a ways of coping, we become disengaged, cynical, detached, sarcastic. We completely disconnect from those around us. You know, we view the world with disdain. We might lead reckless lifestyles, dysfunctional habits and vices. We get angry, we get frustrated, we push our boundaries on people. And we might then pop a pill or two, over-the-counter drug, something that our doctor gave us, a sleeping tablet that just goes on forever, or the illegal, unsafe drugs. And we end up numbing ourselves, existing, rather than living, and we become oblivious to what we really want to do in life. You know, people say, my lives have become mediocre, average. I'm just going through the paces, you know. And there's a saying, you know, we're all blind people looking for a black cat in a dark room that doesn't exist. And this is what the mind does. It just goes round and round, it seems, in a circle, in a vortex, and takes us into a negative place. So we're constantly endeavoring to numb the pain we undergoing. It may have not addressed your question about how do we cope with stress, but let's talk about that as well. So in terms of coping with stress, it warrants. There's various ways to cope with stress, and I usually break it down into a 4-state. Maybe it's a talk in itself, but let's broadly discuss it. I look at it as biological, psychological, emotional, and I'll add the fourth column, which is the spiritual, your calling, your purpose, your truth. looking at the biological, that would be medication, getting some level of treatment. Beyond biological, just in terms of medication, it's exercise and various forms of exercise. The youngsters usually, I'll tell them to indulge in the vigorous exercise. You know, play out on the sports field, get the heart rate pumping, palpitating, get it going, get the sweat to run. In that way, you completely detach from daily life. You have put yourself out there. So exercise. As we grow older, meditation, yoga, breathing exercises, all these things help. Stretching exercises, swimming, all these things help us at a physical level. Eating well, nutritionally. We are moving away from processed foods to more natural foods. We're discovering that vegetables hopefully are better rather than maybe meat products which are injected with antibiotics and all these things. There's a transition in the way we eat. We're eating more substances which were closer to the original states that we were in. So these are various, I'll use the word physical and biological shifts we can do to assist us from a stress perspective. The second level, I say, is psychological, mental level, where we may employ what I'll say is logical and rational ways of dealing with life. Learning to avoid the natural stresses, you know, learning what you are as a person and what you can cope with. Trying not to necessarily fit into environments which are stressful for you. Because we all in this day and age are very driven by wanting to fit in and belong. But as it's fine. There's no harm in being, I'll say it, part of a tribe. But we also have to find our own authenticity or individuality and see who we are and finding what's comfortable with us. And that through psychotherapy, through self-engagement, introspection, all those things can help. The third level, I'll say, is emotional and social. Social support networks, family, friends, having those groups that you feel a part of. You don't have to completely fit in, but there's an element of belonging where you feel a part of this group. And that can definitely assist, because there's a beautiful proverb. Alone you can go fast, but together you can go further. And I think that's very important. Patients, I find, with a strong social support network do much more better than those without. And the final level, whatever way sometimes is seen as controversial, the spiritual, it's about having purpose, calling, meaning in your life, finding some level to reason to live beyond just the physical, mental, emotional. Because sometimes when life is challenging, like during this COVID-19 pandemic, it's not like you can go out at the height of lockdown. You couldn't even leave your home for exercise. Mentally, there was maybe not much engagement, and emotionally, you couldn't see your family and friends. There had to be something you had to find beyond all that, and that would be your calling, your purpose and truth. And in that, whatever way we dissect that as something interesting, I'd like to, what Viktor Frankl said, and he described, his book was on man's search for meaning. And he quotes along the lines of, if I quote him rather, that meaning, you find it in three things generally. He describes it in work, relationships, and the third I thought is quite a curveball, in suffering. And it's tough because it doesn't necessarily fit in with the physical, mental, emotional, but geez, you've got to have a spiritual component if you want to find meaning in suffering.
My goodness. You know, one thing that I actually find to be common, it seems as though we're drawing all this problem by actually, we are experiencing quite a lot of pressure, and in our way of dealing with stress, we therefore put more problems. And it brings us back to the topic that we actually are talking of today, mental health awareness. What are those signs and symptoms of mental health illness for people who might be maybe just intoxicated by this lifestyle where they can't find themselves? They think, or maybe they might be seeing this way of living as a new way of living, not knowing that they're actually suffering from mental health illness.
So I'm speaking generally about mental illness, not necessarily of a specific mental illness, because I think that's very important, because some of us, given under stress, may manifest, be it in depression, anxiety, any one of the spectrum of mental illnesses, and these are some of the symptoms, signs and symptoms you might experience if you undergoing some kind of mental challenge. So you might feel down in terms of your mood, low. You may feel anxious. You may even experience the extremes of mood swings, where patients will describe they feel on a high and the next moment they feel absolutely down, where they can sleep too little or sleep too much, as we mentioned. We can withdraw from family, friends, activities. We find things that we previously enjoyed, we don't find interesting anymore. There's a psychiatric term for that, anhedonia, where we just lose interest in things that we previously enjoyed. We may experience low energy, poor appetites, problems sleeping, as I said. We may get angry, hostile, violent, irritable, frustrated. We may even get paranoid at its extreme. Your voices are not there and hallucinate. We find ourselves thinking about death and suicide, and it becomes to play on our mind. And sometimes we'll find patients describing, as much as they don't describe mental symptoms, but they'll describe physical symptoms, stomach ache, backache, insomnia. And that's where my colleagues in the hospital I work in, well, the patient will be subjected to a whole battery of tests, gastroscope, MRI scans, brain scans, whatever, ECGs, and all will come back fortunately normal, and the patient will still present with these symptoms, and at some point they get referred on to me, and you go into the patient's personal history and you find all these psychological and social stresses that is impacting on them at a physical level. And sometimes the patient will be completely insistent that their physical symptoms is as a result of a physical illness and not because of mental issues. And they gradually have to make that transition to recognize, because as you help them understand their mental problems, the physical symptoms dissipate. And that's quite interesting, that these are some of the things that we'll experience. And as much as we deal with these things, patients will also maybe present with where using alcohol use or over-the-counter medication to cope. And that may be the presenting sign or symptom. But it's very, very important to note that all this can be treated. There's always help available. It may be that we're unaware or we have difficulty accessing it, but there is help available.
And I guess one will actually ask themselves this question, because I think people are now then being aware that this is actually happening. I mean, from listening to this talk, they might have an epiphany that, wow, okay, so all the physical illnesses that they're actually suffering from, they come from, not taking care of their mental health. And others might actually ask themselves, okay, fine, this is what the doctor said. Then what is mental health, so that one can be able to maybe take good care of that and actually eradicate mental health illness as a result?
So there's various definitions, but the one that I like using is one by the World Health Organization. And they describe it as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her potential, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make then a contribution to their society or community. So then we, relatively, I won't say optimal state, but in balance with the environment. Where as much as you're going to experience stress, because this is the nature of the world, you're able to deal with it optimally, and not to the level where it impacts you negatively.
And you know what? There's something that you mentioned, and I think it was with the use of cell phones as a way of coping. I mean, people, when they're wanting to escape, they go check what's going on Twitter, what's going on on, and those are obviously part of the technology that has been introduced by the new age, the digital age. And I've got to ask you this: what is the impact of technology on people's mental health?
Well, technology, we obviously the reason why, if they say that the greatest innovations in this day and age has been in the field of information technology and communications.
Mhm.
And understandably so, because that's where human beings want to connect with each other, create more time by getting the information across quicker.
Mhm.
As much as it's been amazingly positive,
Mhm.
I mean, the reason we're doing what we're doing right now is because of advances in the field of information technology,
Mhm.
right? This podcast,
Mhm.
for example.
Mhm.
Yet, it has had a profound impact
Mhm.
on our mental health.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's affected communication,
Mhm.
or should I
Mhm.
use the word connection, because we replace this communication technology with
Mhm.
connecting with human beings.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's affected how we see ourselves, identify ourselves,
Mhm. Mhm.
putting information out there into
Mm.
into cyberspace
Mhm.
allows others to attack people's identities.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we youngsters of today, it's more so, I experience stress as a result of how they are perceived in the cyberspace world. Their image in cyberspace is far more important than the actual physical image in the real world.
Mm.
And there's a professor at Wharton Business School, Stu Friedman, who said the next great sort of liberation movement, and he's at the business school at Wharton, he says the next great sort of liberation movement in our society is about mental illness.
Mhm.
Because I've spoken about this before, and I think it's very important to recognize that mental health challenges in this day and age
Mhm.
is similar to the physical health and safety challenges of the 19th century.
Mm.
When there was industrialization, back then you just worked, you had to do what you did, you had to stand at those assembly lines and physically worked until you were physically exhausted, fell on the floor,
Mhm.
get the next person in. There were no rules and regulations around physical work activity.
Mm.
And because of industrialization, you could make human beings, you could force, I would say, you force human beings to work 24 hours a day.
Mm.
And prior to that, as much as it wasn't all brilliant, there was slavery where people literally made people work 24/7, 365 days a year,
Mhm.
and literally own their lives. And fortunately, we've introduced rules and regulations around physical workplace, around the physical workplace.
Mhm.
There are not many rules around the mental health workplace. It's not like, as much as we spoke of Karoshi, and yes, the Japanese government has introduced rules and regulations
Mhm.
around working excessively.
Mhm.
It's still subtly, if you can't cope, get out of here kind of concept, right?
Mm.
But it's inevitable that there will be rules in the future around this mental health and safety rules. In this knowledge-based economy, we're going to see that.
Mhm.
Yet there's still very much so a stigma attached to this, where less than a third of mentally ill people will get the treatment they need
Mhm.
because of the stigma attached. People don't want to seek help.
Mhm.
As a psychiatrist, given that they may see myself or a physician or a neurologist or a cardiologist,
Mhm.
given that they had a heart attack,
Mm.
it is far more appropriate, it might seem, to go with the sick note from the cardiologist rather than the psychiatrist
Mm.
because of the stigma attached to mental health.
Mhm. Mhm.
And this, as much as we avoid it, though, it still comes at a cost to people and company,
Mm.
to the very corporates that say, leave your mental health issues at home.
Mhm. Mhm.
It affects our productivity and our professional relationships.
Mhm. Mhm.
It destroys the workplace. We hear of toxic work environments. We hear, there's books written about psychopaths in the workplace because at some level they would attract them, because if you're leaving the emotion at home as such, you allow for people who are emotionless to thrive. I'm using the word emotionless, not in inverted commas, to thrive in these workplaces, because the more of emotionless, heartless person you are, the more you might be seen as being able to get the job done.
Mm.
And what we found that we need to change that concept, the stigma, because they've demonstrated that if you spend $1 on people for mental health issues, on their mental health, $4 are returned to the economy. Yeah. And these times, though, do demand that we are resilient and that we don't live because of our circumstances, but persevere in spite of the circumstances, because we can create the best work environment. There's still stresses. And we have to choose not to be the victims of what life throws at us, but rather focus on creating and facilitating our own destiny, if I can say that.
With that being the case, I mean, I'm obviously just listening to you mentioning all these stats, all these symptoms, all these the negative impact that are coming from technology, corporates, the demands of the society. What do we need to do then?
We need to recognize that, I'll use a corporate word that I've heard through corporates, that the human capital, it's a word now being described in business school, is the most valuable resource in our economy. As much as people may be physically comfortable, we need to allow them to feel mentally comfortable. In spite of all of us having our idiosyncrasies, our nuances, our own personality traits. We need to recognize that there's emotional and mental diversity in all of us. I think what's interesting as South Africa is, with what as a country we've been through, is recognizing various cultures and diversities and allowing for that to bring its own strengths to the workplace, because every person has their own unique, powerful story and can contribute to that workplace. And we need the workplace to contribute in terms of allowing room for that wide range of emotions, temperaments, and moods that we bring in. Also, very importantly, we need to feel safe to ask for help and feel safe in doing so. It's important that we be flexible, sensitive, open-minded, and also very discreet about such aspects, because it's not something that is still mainstream. I will get the phone call from a corporate asking me regarding details of a particular individual, and I have to resort to the law and say, I cannot share this information with you, because as much as I'm sometimes tempted to, because the person on the other end seems to be coming from a place of compassion and kindness, unfortunately, I've seen it being used against patients. Because when the company is faced with, during this COVID-19 pandemic, for example, retrenchments, and they have to get rid of 100 employees out of 1,000 workforce, the one with the mental health issues sometimes are the ones who are shown the door. And yet companies need to recognize how what is perceived as a weakness can actually be a strength. Where someone might be anxious, they could be seen as sensitive. Whereas someone who's maybe overtly sensitive is probably more aware of the dynamics in the team. And we need to recognize what may be, again, weaknesses is actually powerful. And they will pick up on the nuances of behavior, which is fundamental to an organization, be it of themselves or the client that they're providing work for.
Those are, I must say that those are very good points you're mentioning, because I think most of the companies are, although we're promoting for like racial diversity, this kind of diversity is neglected. And as you mentioned, that can be actually very positive at workplace, where, a more emotionally attuned employee can be able to resolve certain matters that one who's not that attuned cannot. And all those benefits that comes with recognizing the difference amongst people. With that being the case, then what should we I mean, then how is that going to maybe help with mental health awareness and just eradication of mental health illnesses as well? Mm-hmm.
What you find is that, and the studies again demonstrated, that a happy workplace is a profitable workplace where people work together as a team, are able to deliver more so than those that work as individuals. So, one of the places to actually recognize that is say on the sporting field. As much as you have a bunch of individuals, if they don't get on as a team, it leads to a lot more disparity. But if they all are focused on their goal and they pull together as a team, it allows for far more progress, and it creates for a happier workplace. A workplace where there's zest for living, resilience, fun, happiness, creates for better profit at the end of the day. And allowing people to deal with their feelings, dealing with their challenges, makes people happier. People don't leave workplaces because of the work, the walls, the corporate. They leave because of their bosses, a particular individual. And this allows us to learn more easily and adapt to change more easily, because we're all part of the team. We're able to roll with the punches, able to go with the flow. And then we're able to, this whole thing of balancing work, life comes more easily. Because if your workplace is less work and more family, it allows you to stay that little bit longer if we build them in and maintain relationships. It reminds me of a patient I have who suffers from a very severe mental illness, schizophrenia, where you have auditory hallucinations, paranoia, and he literally is on the spectrum, but he's high functioning enough to work in a corporate. And I always get concerned about his functioning, because at times, sometimes you can find yourself decompensating. And at some point he said something very interesting. He says, he's doing well at his workplace. Like, wow, that's good. Things are going great. Because he had struggled a bit. And I probe further, what was it that allows you to function so well? And he says he's got a good group of people that in his team. Like, okay, and asked further, in what way? He says, it's so good at the moment, we all take our lunch breaks together. We even hang out after hours. And even though he's challenged at a mental and emotional, psychological level, he's able to function and contribute because he feels at home in that environment. In fact, they even meet up on weekends, and I thought, like, wow, this is amazing. But that was holding him together. In another workspace, in fact, in more a general environment, he'd probably struggle. And with all that, the workplace then delivers, hopefully, on your purpose, finding meaning. Your work becomes an environment to grow in rather than to run away from. And that allows us to not just be powerful as an individual, that's important, but to be powerful as an organization.
Be strong.